The air in the Juderia hung thick and still, heavy not just with the late afternoon heat of Seville, but with something older, colder, fear. Isabel Alvarez felt it clinging to her skin like the damp linen of her chemise. From her window, the Giralda Tower pierced the bruised twilight sky, its Islamic origins a beautiful, dangerous reminder in this city obsessed with Christian purity. Below, the narrow street was emptying, shadows pooling like spilled ink. Even the vibrant scent of orange blossoms drifting from hidden courtyards seemed muted, unable to mask the underlying stench of suspicion that permeated the former Jewish quarter, now home to families like hers. Conversos watched, always watched. She traced the small crescent scar near her temple, a nervous habit. To be a new Christian in Seville in this year of our Lord 1490 was to live balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one misinterpreted gesture, one envious neighbour's whisper to the Holy Office. Isabel shuddered, turning away from the window. Her father's strained silence at dinner, her mother's frantic whispered prayers, they were the daily bread of this life. Quietly, she picked up her book of poems, seeking refuge in ink and parchment, but the words blurred. How could verses of love and beauty thrive in such suffocating air? Was survival the only song left to sing? A commotion in the street below drew her back to the window. Rough voices, a jeering laugh. A fruit vendor's cart had overturned, scattering oranges like fallen suns across the dusty cobblestones. Two men, burly and smelling of wine even from afar, were berating the elderly vendor, a fellow converso Isabel knew by sight. His pleas were lost in their mockery. Then another figure stepped into the scene, taller, moving with a quiet authority, dressed not in finery but in the sturdy cloth of a city guardsman or perhaps minor nobility. Mateo de Silva. Isabel recognized him. His path sometimes crossed the edge of the Juderia. He spoke to the drunken men, his voice calm but firm, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. There was no overt threat, yet the men bristled before shuffling away, grumbling. Mateo helped the old vendor gather his scattered fruit, offering a few coins for the damage. His gaze lifted, sweeping across the windows above, and for a heart-stopping moment his eyes met Isabel's. Dark, intense eyes that seemed to see past the cautious facade she presented to the world. There was warmth in them, unexpected, and something else, a flicker of understanding? Or was it just pity? She pulled back sharply, her heart hammering against her ribs. An old Christian, a guardsman. He represented the very power structure that held her family's fate in its hands. Yet the image of his quiet defense, the brief, startling connection of their gaze lingered, a dangerous spark in the tinderbox of her constrained existence. Days turned into weeks. Isabel saw Mateo again, sometimes from her window, sometimes during carefully chaperoned walks with Elena, her family's loyal aging servant whose face held the map of their shared anxieties. Once, near the Triana Bridge, their paths crossed directly. He inclined his head, a formal greeting, but his eyes held that same unsettling warmth. "Señorita Alvarez," he murmured, his voice low. Isabel managed a polite nod, her throat tight, acutely aware of Elena's sudden rigidity beside her. "Señor de Silva." The exchange was fleeting, meaningless to any observer, yet it felt charged with unspoken significance. Later, Elena gripped her arm. "Be careful, Nina. These are dangerous times. Oil and water do not mix." Isabel knew Elena was right. Loyalty to her family, the crushing weight of their precarious position, demanded caution above all else. Yet the memory of Mateo's gaze, the hint of defiance she sensed beneath his calm exterior, called to a part of her that longed for something more than just survival. A few days later, a small, folded note appeared amongst the threads Elena purchased at the market. No signature, just a carefully penned request for a moment's conversation, naming a secluded alcove near the old city walls, a place rarely frequented. Isabel's breath caught. Elena saw the note, her lips thinning. "This is madness, Isabel. Just once, Elena. To speak." To understand the flicker she'd seen in his eyes. After much pleading, Elena reluctantly agreed, her face etched with worry. She would stand watch, hidden nearby. The risk felt enormous, a terrifying leap into the unknown. The alcove smelled of damp stone and jasmine. Mateo stood waiting in the shadows, his usual confidence tempered with an apparent nervousness that mirrored her own. "Señorita," he began, his voice softer now, "forgive my boldness. I felt I must speak with you." Isabel clutched her shawl tighter. "Señor, this is unwise. Dangerous. "I know," he admitted, "but I saw the injustice that day, and I see the fear in this city. It is not right." He spoke of the vendor, of the casual cruelty he witnessed daily, of a growing unease with the rigid lines drawn by blood and faith. He didn't offer solutions, just a shared sense of disquiet that resonated deeply with Isabel's own experience. He asked about her books, her music, seeing past the label of Converso to the person within. Tentatively, Isabel responded, sharing fragments of her thoughts, surprised by his genuine interest. In that stolen half-hour, hidden from the judging eyes of Seville, a fragile connection formed, built on shared humanity rather than shared faith or lineage. As she turned to leave, guided by Elena's anxious signal, Matteo's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through her entire being. "Be safe, Isabel," he whispered. Walking back through the darkening streets, Isabel felt a confusing mix of terror and exhilaration. She had stepped over a line, and the world suddenly seemed sharper, brighter, and infinitely more perilous. Elena walked beside her in silence, her disapproval a heavy cloak between them. More secret meetings followed, snatched moments in hidden courtyards or quiet stretches along the Guadalquivir riverbank, always under Elena's watchful, worried eye. Their conversations deepened, moving from shared observations to tentative revelations of personal hopes and fears. Isabel spoke of her love for poetry, her longing for a world less defined by suspicion. Matteo confessed his disillusionment with the blind fanaticism gripping the city, hinting at a past incident involving the Holy Office that had shaken his faith in its infallibility, though not in God himself. "They twist his words, Isabel," he said one evening, the river reflecting the sliver of moon above. "Mercy seems forgotten." Their bond grew stronger with each meeting, an intimacy blooming in the shadows. One rain-slicked afternoon, huddled beneath an ancient archway, the air thick with the scent of wet earth, Matteo gently tilted her chin up. His eyes searched hers, finding not fear, but a reflection of his own burgeoning emotion. He leaned in, and their lips met in a hesitant kiss, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened, erasing the world outside, the danger, the fear, for one breathless moment. It was a kiss of shared solitude, of desperate connection. When they pulled apart, trembling, the reality of their transgression crashed down upon them. This was more than unwise, it was potentially lethal, yet neither could voice regret. The spark ignited that first day had become a flame, warming them against the city's chill, even as they knew it could consume them entirely. Meanwhile, Seville remained Seville. The whispers continued. The Holy Office held its grim autos de fe in the Plaza de San Francisco, stark reminders of the power wielded over souls and bodies, and eyes watched. Beatriz de Mendoza, a distant connection of Isabel's mother's family through pre-conversion ties, now belonged firmly to the old Christian elite. Her family harbored ambitions, and Beatriz herself possessed a sharp mind and sharper envy, concealed beneath impeccable silks and calculated piety. She had noticed Matteo before, perhaps even desired him. Now she noticed his lingering glances towards the Juderia, his occasional abstraction, the subtle shift in his demeanour. She saw Isabel, too, at obligatory church services, the quiet Converso girl with the unsettlingly intelligent eyes and the family whose carefully managed wealth Beatriz's own family coveted. Suspicion, seeded by envy and ambition, took root in Beatriz's mind. She began to observe, to listen. A dropped word here, a servant's gossip there. At a formal gathering celebrating a recent victory near Granada, Beatriz approached Matteo, her smile perfectly pleasant. "Señor de Silva, you seem preoccupied of late, perhaps praying for the souls of those less fortunate." Her eyes flickered meaningfully towards where Isabel stood with her parents, deliberately isolated near the edge of the grand hall. Matteo stiffened, offering a non-committal reply, but the barb struck home. He saw the calculation in Beatriz's gaze, the predatory glint beneath the veneer of piety. The net, unseen but palpable, was beginning to tighten. Isabel's father, sensing the charged atmosphere, became stricter, his face perpetually drawn. "We must be invisible, Isabel," he pleaded one night, "like shadows, no cause for notice." Her mother redoubled her prayers, her eyes darting nervously at every unfamiliar sound. Elena grew thinner, her warnings more frequent. "They are talking, Nina. Beatriz asks questions." Matteo, too, felt the chill. A superior officer made a pointed remark about misplaced loyalties. An old family friend, Father Ignacio, a priest Matteo had always trusted for his thoughtful counsel, seemed evasive when Matteo tried to speak of his growing unease. "The times are complex, my son," the priest murmured, studying the patterns on the tiled floor. "Wisdom often lies in stillness, in conforming to the currents." Was it genuine advice or a veiled warning? The ambiguity was terrifying. Whom could they trust? The danger pushed Isabel and Matteo closer, their stolen moments becoming more desperate, more precious. In a forgotten corner of a convent garden, shielded by overgrown roses heavy with bloom, their fear gave way to passion. His hands traced the curve of her face, her neck, finding the frantic pulse beneath her skin. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. Their kisses deepened, fueled by the knowledge that each moment could be their last. The rustle of her skirts, the warmth of his body against hers, the shared breathlessness. It was a fierce, silent rebellion against the world that sought to keep them apart. "I love you, Isabel," Matteo whispered against her skin, the words raw with emotion. "And I you, Matteo," she choked out, tears mingling with the intensity of the embrace. But even in passion's heat, the cold shadow of fear lingered. Beatrice's suspicions solidified into certainty. She saw the furtive glances, interpreted the hushed tones of gossip, perhaps even bribed a servant for information. The relationship between the old Christian guardsman and the Converso girl was an affront, an opportunity, a weapon. It offended her sense of order, her belief in the sanctity of pure bloodlines, but more importantly, it could serve her ambitions. Discrediting Isabel's family, perhaps even bringing them before the Holy Office, could remove a perceived social and economic obstacle. And twisting the knife into Matteo, who had clearly chosen the tainted over the pure, offered a satisfying vengeance for a slight, real or imagined. She didn't need concrete proof, not for the Inquisition. Suggestion, innuendo, carefully planted doubts, these were potent poisons in Seville's fearful climate. She began her work subtly, a comment to a receptive acquaintance about the Alvarez family's lack of true devotion, a question posed to a minor church official about the propriety of certain associations. She cultivated an air of concerned piety, masking her venomous intent. She knew the mechanisms of the Holy Office. An anonymous denunciation, carefully worded, could set the gears grinding. She pictured Isabel's fear, Matteo's downfall, her own ascendancy. The prospect filled her with a cold satisfaction. She chose her moment carefully, waiting for an opportune time when suspicions were already heightened, perhaps after a public crackdown or during a period of increased vigilance by the Inquisition's familiars. The summons arrived on a stiflingly hot afternoon. Not a polite request, but a stark official document bearing the seal of the Santo Officio, delivered by two grim-faced men who did not meet Isabel's eyes. It commanded her presence for questioning regarding matters of faith. The parchment felt like ice in Isabel's trembling hands. Questioning. Everyone knew what that meant. The dark chambers beneath the Castillo de San Jorge, the instruments, the leading questions designed to trap, the assumption of guilt. Her mother let out a thin wail and collapsed into a chair, clutching her rosary. Her father stood frozen, his face grey, the illusion of their quiet invisibility shattered. Elena rushed to Isabel's side, her usual pragmatism dissolving into raw fear. "They know," Elena whispered, her voice hoarse. "Beatrice," the name hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Isabel felt a wave of dizziness, the room tilting. This was it, the end of their fragile world. Her first thought was of Matteo. How could she protect him? If they questioned her, tortured her, would she break? Would she implicate him? The shame and terror were suffocating. She had to warn him. But how? The house felt suddenly like a prison, the street outside hostile territory. Elena, seeing the desperate resolve in Isabel's eyes, acted swiftly. "Your father and I will delay them," she said, her voice regaining some of its strength. "Say you are unwell. Buy time. I will find a way to get word to Señor de Silva. Go to your room, child, pray." But Isabel knew prayer alone wouldn't save her now. Elena, driven by love and desperation, slipped out through a back way, risking everything. She found Matteo near the barracks, his face grim. He had heard whispers, seen the familiars near Isabel's home. Elena's frantic, broken message confirmed his worst fears. "The summons, Beatrice! They will take her!" Matteo felt a cold fury rise, directed at Beatrice, at the system, at his own powerlessness. Panic threatened to engulf him. But Isabel's face swam before his eyes, her courage, her vulnerability, their stolen moments of love. Abandon her? Impossible. Public defense? Suicide for them both. Only one option remained, perilous and uncertain, flight. His mind raced. He needed money, horses, a route out of the city, out of Spain itself. His position gave him some knowledge of patrols, of routines. He thought of Father Ignacio. Would the priest help or betray him? It was a gamble he had to take. He found the priest in the cathedral's cloister, the air cool and smelling of incense. Matteo spoke quickly, urgently, laying bare the situation, the accusation, his love for Isabel. Father Ignacio listened impassively, his face unreadable. For a long moment he was silent, tracing the cross on his simple wooden pectoral. Then he looked up, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. "The path of righteousness is not always clear, my son," he said softly, "but God's mercy extends beyond these walls. There is a fisherman, loyal to older ways. He owes me a service. His boat leaves for Portugal on tonight's tide from the Arenal docks. Be there before the moon is high. Go now, and may God forgive us all." He pressed a small, heavy purse into Matteo's hand. It wasn't explicit help, but it was more than Matteo had dared hope for. A chance, a desperate, fleeting chance. Returning to the Alvarez house felt like entering a tomb. Isabel's parents were distraught, paralyzed by fear. Elena met Matteo at the door, her eyes asking the question he couldn't yet answer. He explained the plan quickly, his voice low and urgent. Tonight. Portugal. Isabel listened, pale but resolute. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but the thought of facing the Inquisitors was worse. Leaving her family was agonizing, but staying meant destroying them all. Her father protested weakly. Leave Seville, our home? But her mother, seeing the fierce determination in Matteo's eyes and the desperate hope flickering in Isabel's, nodded slowly. Go, child. Live. Be free. The farewells were choked with tears, hurried whispers of love and blessing. Elena pressed a bundle into Isabel's hands, clothes, a few treasured possessions, her book of poems. Vaya con Dios, niña. Matteo took Isabel's hand, his grip firm, grounding her. They slipped out through the back, melting into the labyrinthine alleys of the Juderia, just as the heavy main door knocker echoed ominously. The familiars had returned. Hearts pounding, they moved swiftly through the shadows, avoiding main thoroughfares, sticking to routes Matteo knew from his patrols. Every distant shout, every closing shutter, sent jolts of adrenaline through them. They passed darkened workshops, silent fountains, the air thick with the city's night sounds, a stray cat's cry, distant music, the ever-present church bells tolling the hours towards midnight. Once, they flattened themselves against a wall as a patrol of the Santa Hermandad passed, their lanterns casting swinging arcs of light, their voices loud and unconcerned. The danger felt intensely physical, a presence breathing down their necks. They reached the Arenal district, the air tasting of salt and river water. The docks were quieter now, the usual daytime bustle replaced by furtive movements and the creak of moored boats. Matteo scanned the darkness, searching. He spotted a small fishing vessel, lights dimmed, a lone figure waiting near the gangplank. Father Ignacio's fisherman. As they approached, the man nodded curtly, his face weathered and revealing nothing. Quickly, he grunted, gesturing them aboard. The boat was small, smelling strongly of fish and tar, but it represented freedom. Just as Isabel stepped onto the deck, a sharp cry echoed from the dockside. "There! Stop them!" Figures emerged from the shadows, city guards, and among them, unmistakably, Beatriz de Mendoza, her face contorted with triumph and fury. Someone must have seen them, alerted her. Matteo shoved Isabel behind him, drawing his sword. "Get the boat moving," he yelled to the fisherman. Two guards rushed forward. Matteo met them, his blade flashing in the moonlight, driven by desperation. He was skilled, but outnumbered. He parried a thrust, disarmed one attacker, but the other lunged. Pain seared through Matteo's left arm as a blade sliced through his sleeve and into flesh. He staggered back, but kept his feet, his eyes fixed on Beatriz's hateful expression. The fisherman, meanwhile, had cast off the lines, the boat beginning to drift into the current. "Matteo!" Isabel screamed, reaching for him. He lunged back towards the boat, deflecting another blow, and scrambled aboard just as the gap widened. The guards cursed from the dock, unable to follow. Beatriz stood watching, her victory snatched away, her face a mask of impotent rage in the receding moonlight. Current part characters, 1740. Total characters, 19, 8 and 55. The small boat slipped down the Guadalquivir, leaving the lights of Seville behind. The fishermen worked silently, navigating the dark water towards the sea. Mateo slumped against the railing, clutching his bleeding arm, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Isabel knelt beside him, tearing strips from her petticoat to staunch the flow of blood, her hands shaking. "Your arm." "It is nothing," he insisted, though his face was pale with pain. "We are safe, Isabel. We are out." Safe? She looked back at the receding silhouette of the city, her home, her family, everything she had ever known, swallowed by the night. They had escaped the Inquisition, escaped Beatriz, but at what cost? They were fugitives now, penniless, heading towards an unknown country, an uncertain future. She rested her head against Mateo's shoulder, feeling the warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart, beneath the rough cloth. He wrapped his good arm around her, holding her close. The river flowed silently beneath them, carrying them away from the land of fear, towards a horizon veiled in darkness. They had lost everything but each other. Tears streamed down Isabel's face, tears of terror, of loss, but also of a fragile, bittersweet relief. They were together. They were alive. For now, in the vast darkness, that had to be enough. The poems in the bundle beside her felt impossibly distant, relics from another life. A new, harsher verse was beginning, written on water and uncertainty, bound only by the desperate strength of their forbidden love. The fisherman spat into the water, his gaze fixed ahead. Portugal lay somewhere beyond the river's mouth, a haven perhaps, or just another place to hide. The night was long and the sea was wide. The journey downriver and then along the coast was a blur of fear, discomfort and whispered conversations. The fisherman remained taciturn, accepting the remainder of Father Ignacio's purse upon reaching a small, unnamed Portuguese cove, pointing them inland before sailing away without a backward glance. They were alone, truly alone, in a foreign land where they knew no one and barely spoke the language. Mateo's arm throbbed, feverish despite Isabel's careful tending. They walked for days, avoiding main roads, sleeping under hedges or in abandoned shepherds' huts, surviving on bread and cheese bought with the last of their coins and Mateo's reluctant sale of his sword's silver pommel in a village market. Hunger became a constant companion, as did the gnawing fear of discovery. Were agents of the Inquisition searching for them even here? Every stranger's glance felt like an accusation. Isabel, raised in relative comfort despite the anxieties of being Converso, learned hardship quickly. She washed clothes in cold streams, learned to bargain for food with gestures and broken phrases, her hands growing rough, her face thinner. Yet, adversity forged a new kind of intimacy between them. They relied on each other completely, finding strength in shared glances, in the warmth of huddled sleep, in Mateo's protective presence despite his injury, in Isabel's quiet resilience that surprised even herself. One evening, sheltering from rain in a ruined chapel, Mateo looked at her, his eyes full of remorse. "Isabel, forgive me. I brought you to this." She silenced him with a finger to his lips. "We chose this, Mateo. Together. We are free, are we not? Free from the whispers, the fear, Beatriz." But the word free tasted hollow when freedom meant exile and near starvation. News travelled slowly, but eventually fragmented reports reached them in a bustling port town where Mateo found work hauling cargo, his arm now mostly healed, but scarred. News travelled slowly, but eventually fragmented reports reached them in a bustling port town where Mateo found work hauling cargo, his arm now mostly healed. Granada had fallen. Spain was united under Ferdinand and Isabella, and the expulsion of the Jews had been decreed. A cold dread settled over Isabel. Though her family were Conversos, this final, brutal act against their former brethren signified a hardening of the fanaticism they had fled. Was her family safe? Had the increased scrutiny fallen upon them after her disappearance? The lack of news was a torment. Mateo saw her anguish. He held her close at night in their tiny rented room above a noisy tavern, offering comfort he wasn't sure he felt himself. His own past felt distant, irrelevant now. His old Christian lineage meant nothing here. He was just another struggling foreigner. He found himself thinking often of Father Ignacio's cryptic words, of the fisherman's silent acceptance. Were there networks, hidden communities of refugees and dissenters, even here? Could they find a place not just to survive, but to live? He began asking cautious questions, listening intently in the taverns, searching for hints, for connections. It was dangerous, potentially drawing attention, but the thought of condemning Isabel to a life perpetually on the run, looking over her shoulder, was unbearable. He had to find a way to build something new, however fragile, from the wreckage of their past. Their love, tested by fear and hardship, remained their anchor, but it needed ground to root itself, a place to breathe beyond the shadows of exile. Their search led them north, following rumours of more tolerant communities towards the burgeoning cities of Flanders, or perhaps the complex tapestry of the Italian states. The journey was arduous, undertaken partly by sea on cramped merchant ships, partly on foot. They learned to be adaptable, invisible. Matteo's skills as a guardsman proved useful in navigating rough towns, while Isabel's quiet intelligence and quick learning helped them manage their meagre resources. In a bustling Italian port city, perhaps Genoa or Venice, they found a precarious foothold. The city was a crossroads of trade and ideas, more cosmopolitan, less overtly obsessed with Spanish notions of blood purity, though prejudice existed in other forms. Matteo found work again, this time as a guard for a wealthy merchant sympathetic to refugees, while Isabel, using the education her parents had quietly provided, found occasional work mending fine lace or illuminating manuscripts for a monastery scriptorium, hiding her own past carefully. They lived in a cramped attic room, the sounds and smells of the vibrant, chaotic city constantly filtering up. It wasn't Seville, it wasn't home. The ache for lost family, for the familiar scent of orange blossoms and the sound of Spanish guitars, never truly faded. Isabel still clutched her book of poems at night, though she rarely opened it now. The verses spoke of a world that no longer existed for her. Yet there were moments of peace, even joy. Watching the sunset paint the canals gold, sharing a simple meal of bread and olives, the quiet companionship after a long day's work. Their love, forged in the crucible of fear and flight, had settled into a deep, resilient bond. One evening, Matteo returned with a small carved wooden bird. "For you," he said, placing it in her hand, "to remind you that even caged birds can learn new songs." Isabel smiled, a genuine, weary smile. "We are not caged anymore, Matteo, just far from the nest." He drew her close. "We will build a new nest, Isabel, here or somewhere else, together." But the shadows of the past were long. Sometimes Isabel would see a figure in the crowded marketplace who reminded her of Beatrice, her heart lurching with remembered fear. Matteo occasionally woke from nightmares, his hand reaching for a sword that was no longer there, muttering about guards and accusations. The trauma of their escape, the loss of their former lives, was etched into their souls. They learned that Father Ignacio had been quietly transferred to a remote parish shortly after their flight. Punishment or protection, they never knew. Of Beatrice, they heard nothing, though Isabel sometimes imagined her, prosperous and respected in Seville, her role in their ruin likely forgotten or conveniently rewritten. There was no justice, no retribution, only survival and the enduring strength they found in each other. They were two uprooted plants, clinging together in foreign soil, their roots intertwined, seeking sunlight in a world that had tried to cast them into darkness. Their future remained uncertain, a path winding through unfamiliar landscapes, but they walked it side by side, their forbidden love now the compass guiding their way, a bittersweet testament to what they had endured.